I could be king, and you could be queen. Nothing would drive them away. We can beat them just for one day. We could be heroes just for one day. Yes, we could be heroes forever and ever. We could be heroes just for one day.
Growing up in Manchester, in the north of England, like any kid, I wanted to be a professional footballer. I wanted to play for Manchester United, the most famous football team in the world. Until seduced by Roger McGuinn's 12-string Rickenbacker, when Mr. Tambourine Man played a song for me. Every jingle-jangle morning, I'd come following him. He was my piper, playing my tune. Everything that I ever did, from the moment I moved into the music industry, influenced me in a lot of the things that I did. There's nothing really like music to take you back to a time and a place, and invariably with a person. And my life was made up from pretty special moments. I remember a quote from Cesare Pavese that said, "We don't remember days, we remember moments." My first real moment happened a week after my 16th birthday, when I went to see Led Zeppelin and I met him. And I never lost sight of what it was like to meet your heroes. And I took that through into my career when I was working with artists and stuff. Then the real world came. I had to get a job. School came and went, but I had to get a job. So I got a job. It was a crap job. I didn't look under the section that said crap jobs, but I landed it. Nothing inspired me. Nothing made me get up to work and go to work in the morning. But there had to be something to give me some disposable income to buy records and go to gigs. That was what working was all about. Then came my second real moment. While I was working there, I saw David Bowie and the Spiders from Mars. I was aged 18. I liked it so much I went to the final night of the tour in London. And not only did he come out on stage and say, "This is the last night we'll ever do," this is the last night of the tour, "This is the last night we'll ever do." And then I had to get in the car and drive 4 hours back in the pouring rain to get in at 4 in the morning to go to work at 8 o'clock to my crap job. So I walked in and the looks I was giving the boss and everything, you could see there was no real future for me. Anyway, on the way home, I picked up a copy of the Manchester Evening News and I flicked through it and I saw an advert for a job as a record company representative for Transatlantic Records. I thought, wow. I couldn't stop thinking about it really, so much that the following day I went to the local HMV store and I flicked through the section that said folk and jazz, which was like Transatlantic's catalogue. Well, jazz was like big men with big cheeks and trumpets. And folk music was scruffy men with beards, like with their index finger in their ear, yodeling and complaining. So I was into Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, so I didn't know where I stood in this. So consequently, I thought, well, you know, I don't have a job in the music business. So if I don't get it, I still don't have a job in the music business. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I applied for it, and I didn't get it. And then 6 months later, the guy who offered me the job called me up, and his exact words were, "Do you still fancy the gig, man?" So it's a longer story. It's quite a funny story, actually, but it's in my book, which is about the lessons that I learned. But too much today. We'll have to talk about it later on. So my career started, in fact, you know, being into music and loving bands and going to gigs and things wasn't a prerequisite for a job with the record company. Certainly I didn't know anything about the catalogue. So my career started selling records out of the back of a van for £25 a week. Could it get any better than that? Well, remarkably, it did. After a few great, crazy years of selling music I knew nothing about, I fancied a change. a friend of mine told me about a job at Island Records. Now, Island Records is my all-time favourite record label. I'd been collecting their catalogue for 10 years. So Mr. Tambourine Man really did exist because he was playing all my tunes. Not only was he going to give me all his records for free, he was going to pay me. How weird was that? So here is where I started to work with people whose records I'd bought as a kid. Mr. Tambourine Man was a guy called Chris Blackwell who founded Island Records. Island Records for me was where creativity really did matter, because Island used to sign artists because of who they were, not just because of what they sounded like and how good they were at making tunes and stuff. Because he said in this business, you go from a bum to a hero in seconds, and you need to learn to be savvy with it. Island Records is really where I learned my trade, because when I started my own promotion company and worked with some pretty amazing acts, I never lost sight of those lessons that I'd learned at Island. It was sort of my spiritual home, about not only working with artists, but working with staff. I never did employ anybody who'd worked for a record company. I just employed people who I thought had that certain something. In the same way that guy had given me the job when I knew nothing about the catalogue, I just knew they could do it. Those people went on to start their own promotion companies. One guy went on national radio for 10 years. And my little intern, who phoned me up from Cardiff, aged 18, hustling me for a job when I didn't have one, who insisted she come and work for me for nothing, and stayed 2 or 3 years. When she left, she went on to manage Coldplay. So all those lessons that I'd learned at Island Records took me through my career. Anyway, the job that I thought was going to be my job for life lasted 2 years. They had money problems, we all got laid off. So fortunately, I got a job 20 minutes later, working with Genesis and Peter Gabriel. And that was a great experience, except after 8 months, there was nothing left to do because I didn't like anything else on the catalogue. During that time, a friend of mine who was still at Island sent me a tape by this band, and then he insisted I go and see the band. It was easier to go and see him than complain with him. So I went to see him, and I went to see the band. They were third on the bill at a gig in Manchester. And the singer was a little awkward. He was hanging from the central heating pipes, and his fingers were bright red. The bass player looked like a hobbit, and they weren't very good at all. But there was something about them that made me curious to go and say hello afterwards. And I got talking to them, and they had so much belief in themselves. They were a bunch of spotty little Irish kids called U2. I went home that night, and I phoned Island Records and said, listen, I'm a bit bored where I am. You've just laid 5 of us off about a year ago or so. Why don't you give me my old job back? I'll do 5 people's work for 1 person's wage. So I took my way back into creating my own job, and I had an opportunity to work with U2. And right from the start, I took them round to every single radio station. And I remember turning up at the first radio station in Glasgow in Scotland and looking back in the car and seeing Bono at the edge there and saying, this is where it all begins, fellas. Only I can get you in here because of who I know. Only you can get yourself in here because of who you are. I mean, little did I know that it was arguably the most prophetic statement in the music industry ever. But nevertheless, we grew up, and I left. My work was done around the end of the Joshua Tree, so it's time to move on and stuff. In that time, I started my own promotion company, and a lot of the philosophies that I'd learnt and stuff, I took into my, my everyday life with people and stuff. David Bowie was a huge influence on me. Like I said, it was about people whose records I'd bought as a kid. When you work with him and you're pissed off because he splits the band up, and then 25 years later you're his publicist and you're sitting in rooms with him and discussing his promotion, you start to understand why he's the most innovative artist of our time. Because he constantly reinvents himself. That's the great thing about rock stars. We'll talk a little bit about definitely my favourite rock image ever, which I only found a couple of months ago. The story behind that is incredible because this iconic photographer, Mick Rock, was looking for a record cover sleeve, and he turned a corner in London, and this kid was on the corner, and he put his own makeup on, made his own cardboard guitar, and stood there like the rock god that he is. I love it so much. It says everything. Anyway, the time came for the new millennium was dawning, and I needed to plan my career for the next 100 years. So I sat there and thought, well, what am I going to do? The music industry was changing, and I'd learned a lot about rock stars and rebels, about the way they did things differently. And they made it up as we went along. You know, we came from a generation of people that were allowed to make mistakes, and I encouraged that with my people. So it was time to move on. So it's very entrepreneurial, emigrating. So I decided to come here. I was bullied into writing a book about the mistakes and the opportunities that U2 and people had made, and Simon Cowell, bless him. And I became every single character in the book. And all of a sudden, I realised that I still had a lot of what I'd never lost, which was that ability to find people and to grow with them. And the great thing about the music industry, and this is it's that relentless youth and that belief in them that they feel invincible. There is no possibility of it not happening. And that's what I feel that it lost a bit. So I came to America to look for my Ziggy Stardust. And after bumbling around a bit, I found him. And he's one of those people that Steve Jobs talks about, who's crazy enough to change the world. And he put together his band of Spiders from Mars. Unfortunately, he added me to his band. And I got to realise that, you know, a lot of the things that make rock stars and rebels the people that they are is that utmost belief in the ability to do things and make things happen. I feel as inspired now as the moment I met you two and sat next to David Bowie. And I look back on a lot of the things that affected my life and allowed me to move into the areas that gave me the most pleasure. And to be working with people now who epitomise what that is about. That's what we see. I think that was what happens in life, because the music industry became a lousy father to me and I needed adopting anyway. So for me to move on and do different things and find a way to work with people who really did make a difference is arguably, after 30 odd years in the music business, quite an amazing place to be. So really, what I meant to say earlier on about a lot of the things that affected me, I think that, you know, the thing that I liked about the way I did things was I remember getting offered a job at A&M Records to work with the police and being in the garden, and my daughter was playing a paddling pool, and the guy asked me to come and join him, and he said he'd have to move to London. And I said, I don't have to do anything. I said, why would I want to move to London? To travel 200 miles south, to travel 400 miles north. And from that moment, I set up my own promotion company and sort of changed the way things worked in the UK. And the great thing about it is that I think that I'm not here to criticise the music industry. I mean, nothing lasts forever. But to have such a fantastic time and work with people who had such a huge influence in my life was quite amazing. My time is running out, but if anybody wants to talk to me later, I'd be delighted to have a chat. Thank you.